My mother used to say, "Ben, do not forget to put shoes on before you head over to Trent's house. You know the trail is rough." Trent, my best friend in grade school, lived in the neighborhood beside mine, and I would walk to his house every day via a dirt trail connecting the two neighborhoods. I can still hear my mother saying this exact quote after years of it being drilled into my head. Back in the 1950s, dirt roads were a common means of transportation for those traveling from place to place in the South. Evidence of this is still seen today through the Linguistics Atlas of the Gulf States. After listening to a recorded interview of Informant 342 from Huntsville, Alabama, it is easy to see why transportation during the 1950s was so hard. Those of us in the 21st century forget how difficult transportation was during this time period, so it is easy for us to take modern means of transportation for granted. Transportation became much more sophisticated in the United States from 1950 to the 2000s. During this time period, the automobile took hold in the States. Cars seemed to guarantee the American dream, the house in the suburbs, the family outings, and the freedom to come and go as you please. All these things seem to help Americans realize the potential of a simple, easy life. In the South, however, this was not necessarily the case. Transportation was hard. A lot of people during this time period still lived in rural areas, working off their land to survive. Many people in the South had cars, but means of travel were not easy due to rough terrain. According to Informant 342, she used to ride over many a dirt road behind the old buggy and horse going cloppity-clop-clop. This suggests that the roads she usually traveled were not very smooth and could not have been comfortable to ride on. The climate and landscape are the main cause of these transportation hardships during the 1950s. The part of the South you came from would determine the kind of terrain you would have to travel on. Some would have to face the Appalachian region of the South, where mountains and winding roads would inhibit your means of travel, while others would have to brave the heat and conquer the bumpy, uneven roads of the deep South states such as Georgia and Alabama. Informant 342 mentions that on her way to visit her aunt, there would be great big old boulders in the middle of the roads, which they would have to face in order to reach their destination. Along with these regional obstacles, large boulders and rocks would have been quite difficult to overcome. Cars in the 1950s were made to sit high on the road. Large axles allowed for higher suspension, but the wheels used at the time were quite small. With such small wheels, traveling over large rocks and bumpy roads would have been quite difficult and not very practical. Cars and trucks today are made with larger frames and wheels, allowing us to tackle the challenges of rough terrain. This is a prime example of how transportation during the 1950s was more difficult than it is today. Automobiles having these imperfections such as small wheels made transportation outside of major cities very uncommon. It was rails and waterways that made it possible to move people and goods across long distances. My grandparents would tell me stories about traveling by train to visit families in states beyond those that border Georgia. They would often mention how the roads along the way would be too difficult for a car, so the safest way to go would be by train. Today, however, train transportation has become less common due to innovations in the car and airline industries. This comes to show how transportation has changed from the early 20th century to today, and how these changes have helped us appreciate modern transportation more. From horse and buggy to modern-day air travel, transportation has changed drastically over the past 60 years. Areas that used to not be accessible by foot can now be reached due to modern technology and innovations in our means of transportation. People can now go from place to place from the comfort of their luxury vehicle or by sitting first class on a world-renowned aircraft. After researching those who lived during a time of unpractical transportation has helped me realize how much we take modern transportation for granted. The era of dirt roads and horse-drawn carriages are a way of the past, but we cannot forget where we came from. These simpler and more effective means of transportation has only helped modern generations to travel more efficiently. By living in the 21st century, it is hard for us to understand anything else other than modern means of transportation. But let's not forget what our grandparents and great-grandparents had to endure in order to provide us with the convenience we have today.